Hi everyone, welcome to the program Taiwan Talks, covering the latest global news and analysis from a Taiwan perspective. I'm Gladys.
I'm Rath Wang.
So as Taiwan has been excluded from participating in the ICAO for almost a decade, today we will explore the global implications of this exclusion, as well as what threats this poses to regional security and other risks. Today in the studio, we have two guests joining us. First, we'd like to introduce you Stephen Tan, Managing Director of the International Policy Advisory Group, an expert in Taiwan's and regional security. And second, we'd like to introduce you Albert Chiu, professor at Tunghai University's Department of Political Science, specializing in international relations.
I spoke earlier to Democratic Progressive Party legislator who was working with legislative bodies around the world to advocate for Taiwan's participation in international organizations. I also spoke earlier to Rick Fisher, senior fellow at the International Assessment and Strategy Center on the risks of Taiwan's exclusion in the ICAO. He joins us from Washington, D.C. We first like to talk about the role of the International Civil Aviation Organization, the ICAO, and how it is so important for ensuring that global air travel is seamless and safe.
Yeah, so first we'd like to ask Albert, for our international audience, can you give us the ideas of the background of ICAO?
All right, ICAO is a specialized agency in UN. Currently, there are 17 specialized agencies in the United Nations, and Taiwan was originally one of the founding members of ICAO, but because of the China factor, we got pretty much bumped out of the ICAO in 1973. So ever since when we tried a lot and made a lot of efforts trying to return to the ICAO, and by emphasizing the significance of Taiwan, also its airspace, what we call as a Taipei FIR, Taipei Flight Information Zone, region. So the last time when we were invited as a guest in ICAO was back in 2013, when Ma Ying-jeou was still as a president. But after Tsai Ing-wen became president from 2016, and ICAO, under the pressure of China, resist to invite us over to there. And this year, the 41st session, I believe, just wrapped up, and we passed in the two sessions. We were not really invited. So, but still, we sent our delegation to the sidelines of ICAO to speak for ourselves, to emphasize the significance of the country of Taiwan.
Yeah, so actually for this type of international organizations, the importance for us to be able to join, it's about sharing information or actually to acquire other intelligence from other memberships. Would you agree with that, Stephen?
Absolutely. As Albert just pointed out, that ICAO, or I like to call it ICAO, it's a United Nations affiliated organization. In Taiwan, we have 23 million people, and the Taiwan Flight Information region, has, at least before COVID in 2019, there are 72 million passengers going through the Taiwan FIR. So we are a significant responsible stakeholder, both internationally in general, but also in civil aviation in particular. So there's no legitimate reason to exclude Taiwan from participating in the ICAO and its related activities. And when I say participation, it's a meaningful participation. It could be a member, it could be an observer, it could be any contribution that we can make. As a matter of fact, it has been recognized internationally, and the only reason that we have consistently been excluded from the ICAO activities is of political reasons. Now, China has been, vowing to exclude Taiwan from literally any part international organization, including ICAO. It's been pushing so hard, and this year, the United States, among many other like-minded countries, either with diplomatic relations with Taiwan or without, have vowed for and openly support Taiwan for participating in that And this year we didn't make it, but we'll continue to do that. I think sooner or later the world will recognize that there's no reason legitimately other than the political to exclude Taiwan from participating in the ICAO activities. And I think I'm relatively optimistic about that in the ongoing future endeavors.
This exclusion seems to be very unfortunate. But if we could go back, Stephen, a bit about what the ICAO does in terms of decision making, and with Taiwan left out of the table, what kind of decisions have been made during Taiwan's absence?
Right, and I think, yeah, you're exactly right. I think China's continuous military exercises have already endangered, the safety of the aviation in Taiwan, and not just in Taiwan, but not just Taiwan Strait, but international communities passing through the Taiwan FIR. So I think the Taiwan being a significant player in this particular case, the civil aviation, and plus the increased and enhanced military threat from China, make Taiwan's participation even more imminent and more significant. So I think the whole world has already, as I pointed out, recognized the significance of Taiwan's meaningful participation. And we're working out, we're ironing out, the political disadvantages, exactly, i.e. the China, the forces and the coercion by China. And so once and if the world recognizes that, and not just ICAO, but many other UN-affiliated or unaffiliated international organizations, and then we should be a meaningful and participative responsible stakeholder in literally all of the international organizations.
Yeah, I agree. So actually the voices from not only the government level to the private sector level, we are all campaigning to be able to joining this type of international organizations. And actually some legislators has something to say.
We spoke about the vital role that the ICAO plays in international air travel. Now let's hear from Fan Yun, DPP Legislator, who is an active advocate for Taiwan's participation in international organizations, on what Taiwan can offer to the world as a member of the ICAO. Fan has traveled to and worked with legislative bodies around the globe to expand Taiwan's participation in global bodies such as the ICAO. Let's take a look.
Actually, this year, United States and Germany have already issued their strong support to include Taiwan in the ICAO Assembly. So I believe if there are more countries are willing to voice out their support for Taiwan, it would be more likely that ICAO decide to include Taiwan as part of the civil aviation safety community.
Legislator, if you could talk a bit about the benefits that Taiwan could receive or the benefits that the ICAO can receive through Taiwan's participation.
I believe air traffic safety is a fundamental human right. Since the ICAO Assembly formulates regulations and standards that are to be adopted by countries all over the world in order to create a safe and orderly civil aviation sector. So since Taiwan is an indispensable part of global aviation, in charge of large numbers of aircraft in the Taiwan flight information region, excluding Taiwan is really a serious loss or even a threat to international air traffic safety. So it's not only for Taiwanese passenger safety, it's for all the international passenger safety.
And the main reason why Taiwan cannot join is because of China, I believe.
Of course, China's political bully toward Taiwan is a well-known fact. So I think that we should, call for the international community to ask China to stop political bullies on Taiwan and on Taiwanese people.
Speaking of that, how high is the chance that Taiwan can rejoin? As you mentioned, there's now support from the US and from Germany.
Since I'm not an expert in this regard, but I believe, it's more and more likely since the pandemic has already proved that, it's an era of global challenging. So the global cooperation is very important. And Taiwan has proved itself that Taiwan can help and is an indispensable part of the global cooperation.
You just heard from legislator Fan Yun on how Taiwan can help on the global stage and the increased global support for Taiwan's participation.
Our first question goes to you, Albert. Taiwan is a major player on the global stage in terms of trade, and it has one of the busiest air and sea lanes in the region. And as the major supplier of semiconductors, this has to go through all different countries around the world through our sea or air travel routes. How much impact does this exclusion of Taiwan from the ICAO and other organizations have on trade, and how should we deal with this in order to be able to further trade?
All right, there are many disadvantages when Taiwan is excluded from the ICAO or ICAO. Number one is like what you mentioned, the trade exchange between Taiwan and also other countries, even China, right? Because the trade exchange is largely dependent on the flights back and forth between different countries. So, for example, because of the tension between Taiwan and China in the aftermath of Nancy Pelosi's visit to Taiwan, and there was a military drills around Taiwan by China, and China did that only on short notice. So that really did not give enough time for relevant parties to get ready for that. And a lot of flights had to take a route, detour to avoid this dangerous zone. So that really increased the cost of trades. So that's gonna be lose-lose situation rather than win-win to me. That's number one trade. And the second is that because we all know that democracies are such an alliance that in democracy not only the lifestyle is consistent, but also the market's rule is consistent across one democracy to another democracy. So that means that when there's a tension between democracy and authoritarianism, then the airspace becomes a zone where different countries between authoritarian and democratic compete against each other. And at that point of time, the ICAO, the ICAO becomes so vital for democratic countries, including Taiwan, of course, to share information regarding what's going on, what kind of potential attack might be posed by authoritarian countries, military drills. I mean, not only China, we can think of the country of Russia, right? When Russia, several times in history, even before 2014, even after 2014, several times claimed that Ukraine is part of Russia and is likely to attack Ukraine. But so the situation can be applicable to Taiwan if we can tell the world, especially our democratic friends, that what is likely to happen to those Western society and the countries, so they can get ready for that as ASAP. So I think that's just off the top of my head, just two important points. I think Taiwan should be part of the ICAO.
I think you raised great points, but if Taiwan was a member, would you feel that there would be more punitive action towards China's aggression?
Yes, of course. The preventive measure could have been taken by Taiwan as well as the United States, and even Japan and South Korea. So that makes the safety of this airspace in a much better fashion.
But also from the ICAO itself.
Right, from the ICAO itself, because ICAO EFTA is a assembly. It gathers together different countries in a room. Yeah.
Yeah. So for Stephen, I remember last time we talked about how Taiwan and China are having the now on-scene conversation because they always set a lot of preconditions that we are kind of unable to answer back, right? So how would you see this type of situation right now in between? It seems like unsolvable if there is no direct conversation in between.
Right. Well, in this particular instance, ICAO, I think we talked a little bit about, legislator Fan Yun talked about human rights, which is fundamental international human rights. And Albert talked about trade facilitation, and safety and security, and also the sharing of information and all that. And in terms of the military aggression and coercion by China, you see a lot of, because of the military drills and all that, there's lots of suspension or forcing the reroutes of the international flights. And that goes back to the fundamentals of the international organizations or the functions of which, such as ICAO, which is international order and the rule-based governance. Now, the fundamental purposes of Taiwan's participation in the international organizations such as ICAO goes way beyond just for the sake of international existence and participation. It's actually being a responsible stakeholder as part of the creation or recreation of the international order in the rule-based governance. Now, China has been consistently in breach of the rule-based governance, international orders. Take this for example. You go through all the drills in causing the suspensions and or rerouting of the international civil flights with a very short last-minute notice, without going through ICAO, with Taiwan being excluded from the organization. That in and out of itself creates an imminent danger. And that danger goes beyond just Taiwan or the people in Taiwan, but also the passengers, the civil aviation flights going through the Taiwan Strait and in the neighboring region. Now, the lack of direct dialogue between Taiwan and China because of the military tension and all that is one thing. But Taiwan and China are not concurrently a member of the international organizations such as ICAO is another thing. If we are a member or observer or a meaningful participant in ICAO, then things of that nature can be avoided. That's for one. Number two, for those obvious violation of the ICAO regulations by China, by way of giving a last-minute short notice for the China's exercises of the military drills in that region and causing the rerouting or cancellation of the international civil flight in and out of itself is in violation, and that should be properly dealt with. And the ICAO in Taiwan being a meaningful participant, not just the sharing information, but also a great way to mediate or to try to solve the conflict, or try to make sure that China goes through the international order and the rule-based governance, which I think is very important, particularly in the era of more military and non-military tension and coercion these days.
What message would you think, what message do you think that it will send to the international world if Taiwan will be able to rejoin ICAO in some day?
Well, let me add up to lawyer Tan's comments on the importance of Taiwan by saying that even if we don't talk about the significance of Taiwan in a context of China threat, all right, simply the shared information about technological advancement is so important, and Taiwan can play a part and do its parts. Take drones as one such example. We know that the drones pose a potential threat, a risk to the aviation safety and airport operations, right? And the ICAO has been revising and adopting provisions in related guidance to regulating unmanned aircraft system. And Taiwan actually had our own system in place already. And this is pretty much like when back in 2003, when Taiwan was not part of WHA, but we have to take care of ourselves in the attack of the SARS, right? And we create our own stuff to protect our own safety, to save our own lives. And pretty much the same case. So even without a lot of international systems, we work so hard on our own stuff. And now, just like what President Tsai Ing-wen said once, when coronavirus hit Taiwan, is that we can help. And we can offer our knowledge in those advancements in helping the aviation make it a better place to fly. And after all, the goal of the ICAO is a seamless sky. That means that we don't need to detour. We have to reach to the destination as we want, from A points to B points, the shortest distance. That's one example.
It would be great if you could talk a bit about how Taiwan can help in this aspect. EVA Airways has never crashed as one of the world's safest airlines, and some other aspects in terms of cargo as well.
Right, yeah, cargo too, yeah. Because like what I mentioned in my first part of the talk is that the cost is always the priority concern for business, right? So if you have to detour, you have to, spend more money on the gas, and also, like you pay more to the pilots, even that it's more fatigue to them, and that decrease the level of safety, yeah.
Right. So not to mention, this is a very cost-sensitive business when we talk about. So what message do you think, Stephen, that would send to the international world if we would be able to rejoin ICAO one day?
Well, I think once again, Taiwan, for the past year or two, Taiwan has been a lot more visible internationally. Yeah. And now facing the threat from China, what we can do is it goes way beyond our way of life, the freedom and democracy and the rule of law, but also the meaningful participation and how we would be able to help, both passively, but more so proactively. Sharing the medical information, the PPEs, the masks earlier in the early pandemic of the COVID-19, that's one thing. But in terms of the civil aviation, I think that's critically important, that the sharing of critical information and sending the right message, abiding by the international laws and orders, particularly the ICAO regulations, and using the ICAO platform as a way to avoid and to reduce uncertainties and international risks in terms of the civil aviation. There are lots of things that we can do if we're excluded. The international communities would be dearly missed by the Taiwan's contribution, and the whole world recognizes this is for the political reason, this is because of China. But more and more so that the international community will recognize that there's no way to exclude Taiwan from any way of meaningful participation in all sorts of international organizations, including ICAO. And this year we didn't make it, but the United States Secretary of Transportation, Pete Buttigieg, has openly, vowed for Taiwan's meaningful participation, which I think is very, very important. Formerly Secretary of State Tony Blinken has also mentioned that. Now, I think the various different sovereign states have already openly vowed for Taiwan's participation. We didn't make it this time, just a few days ago back in Montreal, but I think next time we still have time to work on that. As I just mentioned, I'm moderately optimistic that next round we will be able to make it.
I think you mentioned a great point, Stephen, of how there's much more support internationally,
right.
and with Pete Buttigieg and all these other U.S. officials, and we've had Germany as a
right.
legislator. Fun
Exactly.
mentioned him. Do you feel with more international support that Taiwan stands a better chance next year?
Well, absolutely, because I think China's relationship with the whole world is now a very different ballgame, and Taiwan is on the other side of the equation, has much better relationship and more visible vis-a-vis the rest of the world. Now, I think with the support, now the United States, has vowed for officially the support for Taiwan's participation, and European countries, Germany, as you just mentioned, and I think there is more energy and visibility for Taiwan to be in that role, which was unprecedented a couple of years ago. Internationally, they all have a big concern about antagonizing China, and China has used all sorts of various means to threaten, the international communities, particularly the smaller countries. Now, Caribbeans, Latin America, and African, they're all now realize that, the United States, Germany, and other major countries have, been standing up to support that. So I think the dynamics has gradually changed towards, our advantage. So we're still working on that. As a matter of fact, our government officials have been working very hard with the NGOs to push the agendas, not just the ICAO itself, not just the United States itself, but all the like-minded countries. Isn't that, as a matter of fact, as far as I understand that, the State Departments of the United States have also supported us in terms of, our governments aligning with other like-minded countries to speak for us, to support us, to get into international organizations. So I think next year will be a very different, ballgame. I think we will be, and we should be able to make it.
In the context of ICAO, where do you think that turning point came? Was it a few years ago when China pushed a lot of countries to change designations to Taipei China, add China to Taiwan, or do you think this has been a growing trend?
Well, I think that's one thing, right? China's been pushing for all these airliners to use the Taiwan, the province of China. Yeah. Some countries, some airliners, gave in, some don't, but it creates a lot of momentums actually towards Taiwan. Like, how could you possibly, give in to the authority of China to change the identity of Taiwan to become a province of China, which is totally surreal. So that creates a momentum, towards Taiwan, and plus, China's been, pissing off a lot of other countries recently, and there's growing tension between China and the rest of the world, as I mentioned. So now, and then we're talking about, the UN Resolution 2758. That's a separate story. But now more countries recognize that, Taiwan's the sovereign state. And also the international presence. So all in all, I think, plus the military drills and all that, not just after Speaker Pelosi's visit, but before, it's been going on for quite some time.
I guess we step by step has already demonstrated Taiwan as the trusted partner to the international world. So Albert, how about, what do you think the countries, the Taiwan has, our soft power has been grown substantially with its donation of PPEs around the world during the pandemic, the period. Right. What's your opinion toward the international like-minded allies support to grow in the future?
Okay, I think the delicacy or the knowledge of international relations, or just simply just to say it colloquially, making international friends, is that we don't keep saying that we are so important, we are so significant, we are crucial to your survival, and things like that. But instead of saying that, we should say something like, we can be friends. Yeah. We can do something together, especially in difficult times. Okay, so that's the definition what real friends are about. Okay, so as you just mentioned, the PPE, the personal protective equipment, we offered to other countries who are in need when they are suffering from this virus, and a lot of people died. The death toll, was record high, and we did that. We do our parts, and people would appreciate that, even without our notice. That without our reminder that we help you guys. Now you have to pay us back. That's number one. We tend not to do things in a propaganda way, but we do things in terms of more lifestyle, more operational, more like for daily basis. Then that would be more convincing. Okay, and the second thing is that just what Stephen just mentioned. The momentum is for Taiwan. The time now is in the hand of Taiwanese people, but we still have to do something instead of just passively hope for the best scenario come up. Number one, I have three suggestions. Number one is that we still have to make more efforts dedicated to explain to our international friends what Taiwan is doing and can do in the future regarding maintaining a safety aviation space. So broadcast in English, such as 10 Plus, the program, I'm propaganda about ourselves. Right, yeah. So I think it's very crucial, right? Because we talk to the international society, directly. Yeah. Okay. Number two is that more lobbies. I think lobby is so important. Even though lobby culture is not that salient in Taiwan, and a lot of people don't even know what lobby means. But lobby in Congress, like on Capitol Hill in the States, is so vital. I mean, think about the Palestinian Israel's lobby contest out there, and you see why the U.S. foreign policy is that lean towards Israel. Is such one example. So lobbying is so important, and to be frank, when President Donald Trump talked to President Tsai by the phone, that was also the result of lobby. Number 3, finally, is keep sending delegation regardless to the ICAO assembly sideline. Okay, we can hold activities outside the session room, and we can say something loud even outside the building. And sometimes it's not only the job of the government, the Taiwanese government to do, but also we can have our kids, our young generation, organize as a NGO group.
Just like the WHO.
Go there, yeah, and because like what I said, when you as a foreign people, you see, there are a lot of ordinary citizens from this country speaking for their interests, and they'll be touched. In the long run, that will add up incremental change to people's perspective on Taiwan and China. But first of all, I will still have to say that it's still a long way to go for our international friends, even foreigners in different countries to know about the situation in Taiwan. Still many people in the international society does not distinguish Thailand from Taiwan. They thought it's all in Asia. It looks all the same, but it's not. So, to that degree of the targets, I think we still have a long way to go. We have to work on that.
Yeah, I always have the feeling the Chinese that we have to keep fighting as the thing that we need to do.
Make it loud,
Yeah.
Just to go back in terms of lobbying, if you could explain to our international audience a bit, how many countries do we have active lobbyists? Of course, the U.S., as you mentioned.
Yeah, U.S. is the most primary country that we work so hard on that, and not to mention that China invests tenfold, the size of budgets than Taiwan did. So it's always not enough. Money matters, but money, in terms of size of nation, in terms of size of budgets we put in, it's hard to compete against China. But what we do is that we can do things more skillfully. We can do things more, more wisely. That, for example, one thing like what I mentioned, the ordinary people's diplomacy skill that we can do. As far as I know, that there are a few students, grad students from NTU, she or he actually did something like that via the internet and talk about the situation in Taiwan, and even help out other countries like Kosovo to build up their internet domain. So that, like what I said, that's operational. That's just immediately useful to countries who are in need. Okay, and European Union parliaments, I think, it's also a increasingly important place for us to invest either money or efforts in there, because that the foreign policy style in European countries are vastly different from that in United States governments. Simply that they believe in soft power. Okay, and China knows that very well too, and that is why they built up a lot of Confucius institutes overseas, including in Germany, in France, in UK, and the United States knew that and appreciate that indeed. Before, when I was in the States, even my school had that Confucius Institutes that sponsor professors, give them more extra salaries. But ever since Donald Trump took office, and also Xi Jinping became a wolf warrior, and like what Stephen just mentioned, that all over the world pretty much knew that this China is not a China they perceived before. So they use different strategy. So lobby is so important. United States, European Union, and even now we have to switch our attention, not switch, but just add up a couple more countries in the Muslim countries, right? Southeast Asia, because they have different concern. They have different concern with, for example, their labor rights in Taiwan. There are a lot of immigrants, workers in Taiwan. Did we treat them well? Did we offer them convenient environments they can work happily here? I think we can do that, and we don't actually obsessed by our pessimistic environment before that we cannot do anything about it. We can, and now the situation is totally different. And we got a lot of different alternatives, especially when the internet becomes so common to use, and we can rely on that to do more.
Is that interest also from, say, what's happening in Xinjiang as the alleged, concentration camps and all that? So is this an opportunity for Taiwan to go in,
Yes,
where
yes.
China's not doing as well?
I mean, just to be literal, we pick up the problems of China. And those problems has to do with the human rights, with the freedom of speech, with the betrayal to the Hong Kongese people that, it's 50 years for no change, but actually it changed right away, right? I mean, those are problems that Chinese government is having. So we can pick up on that and tell the international societies that you are wrong, and we all together should work on this and to help those people who are in need.
Let me just pick up really quick on the power of the private sector, or the importance of the public-private partnership, not just for the domestic policy issues, but also international presence and visibilities. When we talked about advocating for the interests of Taiwan, I think it goes beyond the administration's making the efforts by allocating the budgets to advocate internationally in all jurisdictions for Taiwan. But it's also the private sectors, the NGOs' role in building up the private-public partnership to press for the international meaningful presence for Taiwan. But the core, when I say that Taiwan's interest or the best interest of Taiwan people, we have to demonstrate the core value, which in my view is the freedom, democracy, the rule of law, and our consistent and improved political system over the decades, from an authoritarian regime to a full democracy. And this migration for the past 3-4 decades, it's not easy, it's not robust, and people sees that, people around the world see that. But how we're gonna present the value? So I think the power of the private sector, not just the NGO, but the profit-seeking business communities, the business leaders in Taiwan, working hand in hand with the nonprofit organizations and the administrations, could be more powerful than simply just advocating for the best interests of this particular industry or business sector, but more so the best interest of the people in Taiwan, which is preserving and continue to live what we stand for and what we hold on to.
And that is?
And that is the independence from China, that is democracy and the rule-based economy, and that is the rule of law and the freedom. And that is something that we've been working so hard on and migrating from the authoritarian regime so successfully for the past 4 decades, and we don't want to lose that. And the whole world will not see us losing that core value. So preserving what we stand for, what we hold on to here in Taiwan, is so critically important, not just for Taiwan or people in Taiwan, but for the whole world. And that is something that we should send out and get across loud and clear, not just by the administration, not just by the government, but also the NGO and the business leaders in Taiwan.
Yes, I think we'll more to come for this part, because in countering China's action, the U.S. government has also announced a ban on selling advanced chips to Chinese companies. So that topic we'll come back to talk about it.
We just discussed what Taiwan can offer to the world, Taiwan's soft power, including through its participation in the ICAO. Let's now hear from Rick Fisher, Senior Fellow at the International Assessment and Strategy Center in Washington, D.C., on the risks that Taiwan's exclusion poses not only to the region, but also the entire world. Rick is a longtime security analyst and author of China's Military Modernization, Building for Regional and Global Reach. Let's take a look.
China has excluded Taiwan from participating in ICAO meetings since at least 2013 is a tragedy and a imminent threat to the safety of air travel around Taiwan and in the East Asian region. Taiwan is a major player in the aviation, passenger, and cargo transport sector in Asia. Taiwanese airports host over 70 million passengers a year, and it appears that about every week, over 130,000 passengers travel between Taiwan and China. So it would also be in China's interest to have Taiwan integrated into the ICAO.
What does Taiwan's absence mean to regional security?
Taiwan has a militarized air traffic China problem. China, of course, wants to conquer Taiwan, destroy its era of democracy, and turn Taiwan into a military base from which it will conduct operations over the coming decades on the way to trying to impose political, military, and economic hegemony on the earth. It's not going to be enough to simply blockade Taiwan and to try to force Taiwan to accept the surrender of its era of freedom. The Chinese Communist Party is going to have to deploy the PLA and deploy troops. It's going to have to invade Taiwan. And a large part of that invasion force is going to go to Taiwan via the more than 3,000 Boeing and Airbus airliners that China employs in its various airlines. Most of these airlines are already organized into a militia structure that the People's Liberation Army can mobilize for the purpose of transporting troops and equipment to airports on Taiwan that it captures. It's very much in the interest of all of the free countries of Asia that China not be allowed to mobilize its airlines, and that the ICAO play a leadership role in making clear to China that if it uses its airlines to conquer the democracy, to attack the democracy on Taiwan, that it will be expelled from the ICAO, and that along with all manner of boycott against the sale and support of Chinese of airliners to China, the cessation of all manner of air traffic to and from China, that China is also going to be excluded from the principal rule-making organization that helps to make air travel safe.
You just heard from Rick Fishers on the serious implication Taiwan's exclusion from the ICAO poses, as well as immediate military threats from China in its quest to invade and take over Taiwan.
Stephen, our first question goes to you. Rick just mentioned that China's military maneuver will probably, in large part, be taken out on air with, its passenger planes being filled with missiles, and that could potentially drop with, the Airbuses and the Boeings that they have.
To some extreme level.
To an extreme level. And how do you see that in terms of having a risk in terms of what that means to regional stability, and will that actually happen?
Well, I don't know the probabilities of what Dr. Fisher mentioned that's happening, but anything is possible. In China, there's no clear separation between the private sector and the public sector, as I just mentioned. Vis-a-vis Taiwan, now it's anything is possible. You see the PLA utilizing the fishermen's boat and to do some detections and to do some information and intelligence. So I can't wipe out the possibilities, but I can assess the likelihood of that happening. But it's good that we have a friend from the United States sort of ringing the bells and, making sure that, people are aware of the possibilities of PLAs utilizing the private sectors and the civil aircrafts to do the invasion or coercion. So I think that creates another reason that, working on the imminent threat from China is everywhere. It's not just military. It's not just military drills. It's not just the exercises. It's national defense, self-defense, and goes to the exchanges of information and participation in the international organizations, inviting our friends to be here in Taiwan, and making sure that our voices are heard. And we have friends over the places nowadays. You hear people from Washington, D.C. sort of ringing the bells to the whole world to know that, which I think it's great. I'm not going to say that it's an exaggeration because, as I just pointed out, that anything is possible, but we want to reduce the chances of that happening. So there's lots of things that we can do to reduce the risks.
Right. So Albert, do you have anything to add on?
Sure. Of course, that the ICAO is about the civil aviation, right? It's not about military. But what if there's a war outbreak, between Taiwan and China? ICAO could do something to help that too, in terms of for the benefits of Taiwan. Number one is what I call is institutionalized setup in ICAO that we just came to learn in the Russia-Ukrainian war. Russia got kicked out of the ICAO just because of the illegitimate attack from Russia in Ukraine, right? So ICAO might be able to do that to China if China's attack in Taiwan is not legitimate. Okay, that's number one. And even they can add up more institutional obstacle to China. For example, not share crucial information regarding airspace with China. So make it very difficult for them to deploy their air force. That's number one. The second one is that if there is an outbreak of a war, really a war out there, and I think that for Taiwan, it's important for our neighboring countries, and even our democratic partners to share information with us. And we all know that, European Union, the G7 countries, including the United States, they did this a lot to the Ukrainian military force and even Air Force, and that helped them to effectively protect themselves from, vital attack. Okay, so I think, of course, that the ICAO is for civil aviation, but if we can be part of it, and of course we have to join it first. That's really difficult, but like what the lawyer mentioned, I'm optimistic about that approach. It's an everlasting process. Just right now, it's gonna be next decades, 2 decades, and we keep on doing that. But in the future, if we can really return to ICAO, even only as a guest or as an observer, we can gain the information I just mentioned, all of this, and that's going to be very helpful for not only for the civil aviation safety for Taiwan, but also for the national.